What do we think? So I'm Duncan. Hi. I teach presentation skills to researchers all over the country. It's what I do because research is really important. You're doing really cool work, but there's lots of communication challenges around that in various different ways. And presenting your work to other people, to groups of other people, at events, at conferences, pitching your work, pitching proposals you want to get through or taken up can be a big part of the work. And often it's quite hard to do that, and particularly if you're dealing with quite complicated projects or quite niche bits of discipline. So I work with folks like you. I work with researchers in universities. I work with researchers in government organizations to help them talk about what they do in a way that makes audiences interested and engaged and kind of switched on. Because research communication is not always the most fascinating and interesting and engaging and upbeat thing you can subject yourself to on a Wednesday morning. So we try and fix that because it should be, because the work's important and it's interesting and it matters and all of those things. So thinking about research communication, what do we think? And you can tell me this in the chat box, friends. What do we think is the most important thing about a piece of research communication? What do we think? Tell me in the box. What is the most important thing about a piece of research communication? What have we got? Thought the message lands, Elizabeth. Good. Making it personally relatable. Nice. Understanding, outcome. There's 100 of you here, so these are going to be fast. Don't be offended if I miss yours. Impact, just one big word. Define that. Making sure benefits have been communicated. Yeah, the benefit of the work that the audience understands. So there's clarity there, which is good. That it's accessible. Nice one, Laura. That ties into quite a lot of what we're talking about today. The difference it will make, yeah, so people understand that. It's interesting. That it speaks in the understandable language of the community it works with, right? It's not hidden in the kind of academic fluffle words. I was going to use a stronger word there, but I don't know how down with swearing you all are. So, yeah, absolutely, that it's persuasive. Give me the money, Heather. Absolutely. That it's simple, relevant, and important for policy and practice. Right, so we're doing the right stuff. Okay, cool. Good answers, everybody. For me, the most important thing about a piece of research communication is this beach ball for all of you who are at the coast and or Sean. Imagine you're at the park or you are at the beach and you've got some friends with you. It's a sunny day and you have a ball. What do you do at the park or the beach with the friends and a ball? You play the greatest game human beings have ever created. It's a game called catch. You throw the ball to your friend, they catch it, they throw the ball back to you, you catch it, the sun is shining, everybody is having a wonderful time. You throw the ball to your friend, and in that moment, you hear a beautiful tune tinkling through the breeze. It is, of course, an ice cream truck. And like all sensible grown-up people, you are distracted by the idea of ice cream. If you hate ice cream or you're dairy intolerant or something, then it's like a cute spaniel puppy runs across the ground with his ears all flopping up and down. And in that moment, your friend throws the ball back to you. And it smacks you right in the face. That, my friends, is the most important lesson I can give you about research communication. And that is, it has got to be two-way, right? Like a game of catch. If you go out and you play catch and there isn't somebody else there to throw the ball to, then you're not playing catch anymore. Okay? Or if that person is not paying attention, we're not playing catch anymore. You're just throwing a ball at people. And that is bullying, and we don't do that. Okay? So if you're just throwing the ball and going and picking it up and throwing it and picking it up and playing by yourself, that's golf. And it's pointless. So we have to be doing... Joe's found the react laugh button. Thank you, Joe. It's an easy joke, but I like it. You've got to have two-way, right? There has to be two parties in a piece of communication, and they both have to be involved. You're the person throwing out the ball, the doing of the communication, then there's somebody catching, receiving the communication. We use this metaphor for an awful lot of what we teach because there's lots of things you can do to either make the person more interested in catching the ball, right? They want to play the game, or make the ball easier to catch. So somebody's mentioned language already. If the ball is covered in horrible, nasty language I don't understand, then I'm not going to want to touch it. I'm not going to want to catch it. And you can stretch the metaphor in various ways. But the big bit is getting them to want to play with you in the first place. And this is where stories come in. Stories are really powerful tools, and storytelling is a really powerful tool. The way we think about it is it's a bunch of techniques that you can steal, you can use in your own settings, and that's what we're going to do today. But before we do that, let's have a think. Where do you see stories and storytelling today? Because we think of storytelling maybe as like a childhood thing, maybe it's a thing we do with kids, maybe it's not a professional thing or a work thing, or it's somehow separate from research. But have a think. Tell me in the chat box, where do you see storytelling in day-to-day life now in 2025, the 21st century? Big data, science, that's what we're doing. Where do we see it? We see it in the news, yep. Creative writing classes, done it, absolutely. Marketing, yep. Politicians respond best to stories, yeah. Counselling, documentary, everywhere. Sharon, or Summers, Sharon I suspect, has picked up on that one. Books, news, TikToks, absolutely. Every presentation should be a story. We use it a lot in psychology. Cool, Emma. LinkedIn, case studies, media stories, yeah. Everywhere is kind of the right answer. If you stop and think about it, we are still exposed to information in story form, in narrative form, in almost all of our interactions with information out there in the world. Okay, there are very few. Even academic papers and stuff are written in a narrative form. A report arguably still has some sort of we did this, then we did this, then we did. There's some sort of narrative flow to it. We are fairly conditioned as human beings to absorb information through story form and to pay attention to story form. And that's why we teach this stuff. It's why we think it's really important. Hopefully you're on board with that. Otherwise you wouldn't be here. You wouldn't have thought this is an interesting thing to come to. And we are going to start the day. This is your first big activity. We're going to write a story. Now, those of you who don't do any creative writing, or don't play Dungeons and Dragons, or don't have kids for whom you must make up stories on the fly, this might feel a little bit daunting. However, I'm going to tell you what to do. I'm going to give you the first line of a story. You complete the sentence. I'll give you the next line. You complete the sentence. I'll give you the next line. You complete the sentence, and so on. Make sense? Getting some nods from the camera people, which is good. Camera people, you're like my litmus test. If you lot seem happy and cheerful, I will assume everyone else is happy and cheerful. But everyone else, somebody FC and TG, you can do thumbs up. That's really helpful for me as well to know that you're on board with stuff. So we're going to write a story. You can do this either on pen and paper. You can do this in a Word document. You can do this in the chat if you want, but if you're going to do it in the chat, don't hit enter until we've finished the whole story. I don't want individual lines of your stories in the chat. I want the whole story if we can get there. So you need something to write on and kind of put this together. Give me some thumbs up if you've got that and you're ready to go. I'll give you 30 seconds. Camera people are nodding. Thumbs up, thumbs up. Non-camera people, where are we at? Thumbs up coming in. Splendid. Cool. Right. So let's make this nice and big so we can see it. Here is the first line of your story. Once upon a time, there was. What was there? I don't know. You complete the sentence. Once upon a time, there was. I'm not a dungeon master, Laura, although my brothers have tried to rope me in many times and say I would be very good at it. Not least because I've read fantasy since I was 10. So one day I'll give it a shot. Once upon a time, there was. What was there? Okay, we're going to rattle through this, so don't be writing Lord of the Rings or Anna Karenina or War and Peace or something. Okay, next line of your story. Every day. Every day, what? Okay. Next line of your story. Until one day. Until one day. For those of you who are just joining us, we're writing a story. Complete the sentences on the screen. Okay. Next line of your story is because of that. Because of that. Okay, and the next line then, because of that. So same again, but with more emphasis, because I wrote it in capitals. This is the second last line, so heads up, the next line will be the end. Just sometimes people end up writing themselves into a corner because they don't see the end coming. Okay. And the last line is until finally. Until finally. Okay. There are a lot of you in this room, and we don't have tons of time to hear everybody's stories. But if you have a typewritten story, you can drop it into the chat box if you like. Would anybody be up for coming on microphone and reading their story out loud? Give me a little hands up or a wave or something if you want to. You don't have to. It's okay. I think, Joe, you're kind of in between. Come on, Joe, you're going to do it. Oh, no, somebody else has. Teresa, is that? Teresa, you got your hand up? Thornton? Hello?
Yeah, hi. It's brief and off the top of
That's,
my
o-
head.
that's okay. Go for it. Let's hear what you got.
Okay. Once upon a time, there was a remote village of only 20 inhabitants. Every day, the smallest child went to the stream to gather water until one day the child did not return. Because of that, everyone stopped what they were doing. Because of that, I can't read my own writing. Because of that, they worked together to search every place possible until finally the child was found.
Ah, thank you very much. Round of applause. This is very, very good. And we've got two more hands up. I think DT, who's that? Donna, you are first, so you can go first. And then Laura, we might have some time for you. We'll see. So thank you very much, Teresa. That really good story, really fun. Donna, let's hear what you've got.
Once upon a time, there was a woman who passionately loved planet Earth, especially the sea. Every day she would spend some part of her day by the sea, whether swimming, having a cup by it, taking photos, or cleaning the beach. Until one day she found an old fisherman's bucket whilst on the beach, and it dawned on her that she should do more to protect this beautiful environment. Because of that, she reached out to ask if others would like to get together to regularly clean the beaches and keep litter out of the sea. Because of that, the ninjas were founded and Sales's beaches became much cleaner, new networks were formed, and differences made. Until finally,
Hey!
the woman wanted to do more to protect the sea and looked to change her career.
Oh, fantastic. Is this an autobiographical story?
Yeah, slightly, because
Well done. That sounds like an excellent bit of work and a very good project. Very, very good. We have one more hands up. Another Teresa. Teresa Hocking. You can go last. Yeah, you can go last. You can go now, but that's all we're going to have time for. There are lots of stories that popped up in the chat though as well. So when we get to the end, and I'll give you a minute afterwards to have a read of some of the ones in the chat. But Teresa Hocking, if you want to do it. If there are other people not on my screen with their hands up, I apologize. I've only got the first 70 of you or something on my screen. So Teresa Hocking, off you go.
Every day Marvin the Mole would pay a squirrel to make his molehills, until one day Sherman Squirrel called in a sick day. Because of that, Marvin had to dig his own muddy holes. Because of that, Sherman was sacked and Marvin happily made molehills every day, until finally all the moles joined in after seeing what fun Marvin had, and they sometimes let the squirrels join in too.
Hey, very nice. You're a positive, happy lot, aren't you? When I do this with like third year PhD students, it's always miserable. When I did it through COVID as well, it got quite dark. You know, art mimics what is happening in the environment. There was people were expressing some quite dark stuff. Okay, we're going to have. I'm going to give you a minute. Find a story in the chat to read and have a think about why these stories are interesting. That's the purpose of this little jaunt. Why are these interesting to listen to or read? I'm going to give you just a minute. Find a story, read it, and then tell me in the chat box, why do you think these stories? What makes them captivating? Okay. So we're getting some reasonings coming in. I will also say those of you on the D&D dissemination chat line, go look up a group called Science and Sorcery, who do Dungeons and Dragons plays, both full long plays and short one-shots, with scientific themes and communication themes. It's run by a group of psychommers who I know, and they're very, very good. So if you're into D&D and communication of science, they're a cool group to follow. Okay. Reason stories work. We've got a bunch of stuff in there. Engaging language. They're perfectly formed. Shows what has been normal and then a disruptor. Yep, somebody, Mackenzie, switched on. They're plain language and understandable. Most listener wants to know what happens next. A few of you have mentioned that idea. Unexpectedness, right? That idea of we don't know what's going to go on. Curiosity gaps. Loop. Kate, you're jumping way ahead of the game here. Connections move the reader from one place to another. Yeah, resonates with the right group of people. So there's kind of things there to connect with. Linearity, details. Good. These are all good reasons. We're going to break it down a little bit into a way that we think about storytelling for research, because it's not just about providing stories that are entertaining and interesting. It's about using these techniques to get people to engage with and pay attention to your work. And the way we conceive of storytelling, or I guess storytelling techniques in research communication, as ways in. So sometimes from the outside, a research project can look a bit like a maze. It's a bit blank. It's hard to work out what's going on. It's hard to get a kind of mental grasp on either why the work is important or what actually is being done, or whatever. And as we've kind of mentioned, things like language and stuff just make this denser. And settings, we're doing some stuff with community participants in January. And when I've worked with folks like that before who've not been in academic or even council settings, come into those buildings can feel like a maze and a little bit difficult. So we see stories as a ways through, right? So these techniques that I'm going to share with you today are about helping your audience find ways in and ways through the research, so they can kind of get a grasp of it, right? What I kind of say to people is that when you do this well, audiences go, okay, yeah, I get it, or I kind of get it. They don't have to fully understand all of the subtleties and everything that's going on, but I get it. I get what you're doing, why you're doing it, why it matters, and that kind of stuff. And we split it into kind of 3 pathways that you can use, or sets of techniques. There's empathy, imagery, and curiosity. And in the stuff that you have pulled out about why stories work, we've got all 3 of those. We've got some curiosity stuff in there. We've got empathy stuff with relatable things. We've got some imagery. How many of you saw Marvin the Mole sitting lazily by while he paid a squirrel to dig his molehills, right? There's some imagination and picturing going on. And these 3 things are fairly core to almost all storytelling, and are reasons that stories work. So reasons they affect us and we engage with them and we find them interesting. So back to my beach ball metaphor, this is the reason that people want to play catch if you're telling a story, right? If they want to join in. But as communicators, we're not just trying to get someone to participate in a thing, we're trying to communicate something. We have a purpose or a point we're trying to get across. And we can use these pathways and the techniques under them to do different things. So you can use empathy to get people to emotionally care, right? Essentially give a toss about the work. And this is useful in lots of different ways, whether you're talking to policymakers who can help support or fund it, whether you're talking to practitioners who you need to help deliver it, whether you are trying to justify funding spend to your line manager. Getting people to care about the thing is really, really important. And you can use empathy to do that. You can use imagery to help with understanding. So to help people visualize and have a kind of grasp of a way into a world that they're not familiar with, and introduce new ideas to them in ways that are understandable and make sense. And you can use curiosity fundamentally as a way to get them to want to interact in the first place, right? I want to know what's going to happen next. I want to pay attention. I want to keep this engagement going. And under these 3 pathways are a bunch of different techniques. It's worth saying that if you're into storytelling and you're interested in this space, or you come from a creative background or an arts research background, this is a fairly reductive way of thinking about storytelling. What we've done is splitting them out into sets of tools and pathways that you can use that we think are helpful. But storytelling, the reality of it is they all intersect in real stories in various different ways and at various different levels. So the stuff we're doing today are kind of simple breakdown techniques that we think can help with research communication. But if you're into storytelling or this inspires you, this is very much the tip of the iceberg, and there's much, much more to learn if you want to. We shall start with creating understanding through imagery. This one is really interesting. It's really, really useful if you're dealing with concepts that are unfamiliar to people, if you're dealing with research that is a bit new, or you're talking about settings they don't understand, right? Or can't picture. And the first technique here is one I've used already. It is metaphor. Metaphors are hugely, hugely powerful tools for explaining new information to people who don't know it yet. And this is often good for explaining like how things work or how particular bits of science work. You're all doing variations on public health projects, so you're not doing hardcore physics, say, or deep cell level biology, although some of you might have to explain some of that sort of stuff in your work. Metaphor can really help with that, but it can also really help with explaining procedures and like how stuff happens and like the processes things go through. Fundamentally, what we do when we have a metaphor is we take knowledge the audience knows, something they're familiar with, something they get already, and we take the knowledge that they don't know and we map them together. Hence the map. It's a visual metaphor and a little joke. And we map one on top of the other. And by doing that, by creating by taking a familiar thing, you provide this way in. It doesn't feel like, oh my God, there's a bunch of scary knowledge that I don't understand and I just have to rush at it. It's, oh, okay, no, I do understand it. I get it. So one of the things that we do and we talk about is people come to me and they say, oh, Duncan, presenting is hard, right? There's so many things, right? You have to think about what do you do with your hands? Where do you look? You've got to remember all of your words and your slides and what's going on with that. What do you do with your feet? Do you move? Do you not move? There's so many things, right? I can't do it all. And I go, okay, can you drive? Hopefully they say yes, otherwise I scrabble around for a new metaphor. Okay, imagine, even if you can't drive, imagine learning to drive and you're sat there for the first time, the steering wheel going, Oh shit. Okay, there's so many things I have to do, right? I have to do stuff with my hands. I've got to look in 8 different mirrors all at once. I've got to remember all of the highway code. And it feels tough, kind of like presenting does. But then once you learn to drive, you pass your test, you drive a bit more, it gets easier. And then you drive a bit more, it gets easier, it becomes instinct, you think about it less, and eventually you don't overstress and overworry, you just get in the car and go to the shop. Same is true of presenting, eventually. It's a skill set that you learn, and it goes through, and you get better at it, it becomes less stressful. Metaphor, mapping new concept onto concept you are familiar with. So anywhere in your work where you are trying to explain a new concept or idea to people, if you can distill out the concept of it, you can explain it to somebody else. I had one recently with a guy working with lasers. That's slightly beside the point, but he was working with big models, big computer models of an environment so that you can do various tests. So he's building these big models, not 3D models, mathematical models, so you can do various tests to work out bits of physics, which is really useful. And he wanted to explain to the people he was talking to what a model is in the modern sense, what these big mathematical models are. And we came up with this idea that it's like computer games. Some of you like D&D, so I'm guessing some of you also like computer games or have a history with computer games. Back in the 90s when I started playing computer games, you had one level, right? And you have one path you can go through. You can only go on that level. It was a virtual environment where you got to experience something that wasn't real or was maybe a version of real life, but you could only go one way, right? It guided you down one path. And that's how it was. And that's how we used to do modeling. It's how we used to do scientific maths modeling and healthcare modeling. You would build a mathematical model, but because we didn't have the capacity, it had to be quite simple, quite directed. You could do one experiment with this one model. That's not the case anymore. Like modern big computer games that have a whole 3D world and you can go anywhere and you can do anything you want, modern modeling is about building huge environments that you can run lots of different experiments in. So it's no longer one model per experiment. You can do a bunch of different stuff. And that's why it's worth building these big models, right? You're not restricted to just that one line. It's quite a good metaphor. I was quite pleased with it when we came up with it. It's quite effective. It helps you kind of grasp the change that's gone on there. So metaphor, very, very powerful tool. Along with metaphor, we get, and this is really going to be really useful for you folks. It's very useful in settings where you are dealing with very practical on the ground stuff, particularly healthcare stuff. Examples and case studies. These are about, it's not dissimilar, but rather than going for the conceptual thing, right? So here is driving a car is conceptually like learning to present, right? Because it's learning something complicated that feels overwhelming. So we're distilling the concept. Examples are much more like, here is the theory. Let me show you how it works or it applies in the real world. Here is an example of how somebody might behave if they were undergoing this diagnosis and what we can do to help them, or how the intervention we're proposing might affect family X. Okay, these examples allow your audience to, if you pick the example right, it might be a familiar one to them, something they know, and it lets them see their own situation and the relevance of the work to something they're familiar with. So that's what examples are about. It's about going, this is relevant to your life, and this is how you can see the difference it's going to make and see how it applies, because I've put it in a picture of what that is. Using quite visual language here. So when we're telling an example and you go, okay, for example, you then tell a little story. You paint a little picture of the thing happening in the real world. And that's why this is both imagery and storytelling, because the picture painting bit, imagine the scene. This is going on here. This is over here. We've come down with this treatment or this intervention, and it has changed it. So I don't know, imagine at the minute we've got so many people driving into the city centre, and the pollution we know is linked to various health concerns in the city centre. What we are working to do is put on more public transport, on more buses. And so imagine a world where you've got cleaner air here, so that's not happening, but also people know the buses are going to be regular, right? The reason people are driving in is because the timetable is rubbish and we don't have the resources, so people get frustrated. All of this is storytelling pictures, right? It doesn't have to be a real example. It can be, that's case studies, but it can also be fictional. One of the lovely things about storytelling is you can use fictional versions of stuff to make your points. People are quite good at working out when they'll be told a thing that is a story for illustrative purposes versus this is dead fact. But you can also be blunt and say here's a little story, or imagine this situation. You can put it in that sort of creative language. So these are both storytelling techniques. Because what we're doing is we're asking the audience to imagine a thing and then painting a picture of the thing that's happening, right? And tapping into that imaginative bit of our audience's brain allows them in. It's this access, this kind of way into visualizing the thing. So I'm going to give you, where are we, 36? I'm going to give you only 1 minute to see if you can. Think of a metaphor or example that might be helpful in your work. Some of you might have them already that you use to help explain stuff, even things like the way the council works, right? It could be, it's a bit like a monarchy, or it's a bit like something else. So when we are using metaphor, we often have the phrase, it's a bit like. When we're using examples, for example. So anywhere we use those, if you've got one that you like and you use a lot, stick it in the chat so other people can see. Otherwise, spend a minute just mulling and thinking, seeing if there's a place for one in your work. A couple of nice ones in the chat there. I like the idea of research as community detectives, and with Scooby-Doo, people really like that. Again, it's a way in. People get what you're trying to do very quickly. Life is a journey. Work with engagement, knowledge exchanges. Academics often tell people I'm like a translator. Yeah, really nice, Sharon. And often we find metaphors in everyday life fairly instinctively, but with a bit of thought, you can make sure you're finding ones that really resonate with your audience. You're picking situations that they're really familiar with. So for that example, that doesn't work if people don't know what a translator is. And you have to be slightly culturally careful that you're not making assumptions about what's related and relevant for your audiences. But being slightly thoughtful about it is really good. Global warming equals a greenhouse. That's a classic one. Yeah, I think that wasn't been done before. I use a supermarket shopping experience. I do health economics. Really nice. People are puzzle pieces. You're doing this stuff already, which is really good. I encourage you then to think about it. Even those of you who are like, oh yeah, I do this all the time. Start thinking about it deliberately, and thinking about it as a technique you are using to communicate well and for a purpose. And you can embellish that scene. When you're talking about the supermarket shopping journey, you can paint that picture more vividly, you can give more details, you can give less, play around with that as a way to engage audiences and see what works and what doesn't work for your audiences. Okay, the next little bit is in imagery is put places in. Talk about the places. Is that you are doing the work. People like to know where work is happening, right? There's something really engaging about just being like, oh yeah, okay, cool. So you work in shopping centers, or you work in the main council building, or you work up at the university, or you're in a lab. What does a lab look like? Don't be afraid to include that stuff in your communications, right? And it can be actual images of the places that the work happens or impacts, or you can use visual and verbal imagery. You can explain or describe the places the work happens. So are you working with particular communities? Do the streets those communities live in have a feel, have a tone, have a kind of look that you can get your audience to imagine and buy into? This is just a way, it's like a mental engagement. When we start imagining stuff and picturing things, we switch on. How many of you were like, oh yeah, I will imagine a park or the beach with Duncan and his beach ball? Okay, it's a little like switch in. So put the places in. Don't just assume that it's about the information. So that's imagery. Quick chunk on care, emotional care. We'll have time for questions at the end. So if you've got a question, store it up and we'll get to them at the end. But I'm looking at the clock and realized I've got lots of things that I want to tell you. So we're going to smash on through it if that's okay. Making people care is really important. You can't get a lot done if people don't care about the work. Now, you lot work in public health, which is great because everybody cares about health, either their own or their nana's or somebody else's, or right, we all have a reason to care about health in some way, shape or form. And so finding ways to help you do that is really good. One of the key lessons here, let's make this a bit bigger so it's kind of obvious. You want to start your talk in the middle. So if you have these two circles, you've got the stuff you want to talk about, maybe your project or the thing you've been doing or the interventions you're making. Then you have the stuff that the people you're talking about care about. This is their world. This is the stuff that interests them. This is the stuff that matters to them. And spending a bit of time just thinking about what that is, filling that bubble out, can be really, really useful ahead of doing a piece of communication. What you have to do crucially, though, is start in the middle. Your whole talk or whole piece of communication doesn't have to be in the middle. You don't have to have everything overlapping, but you have to start there. If you start deep in your thing, and some of you, if you've worked with research for a while, or you've been exposed particularly to some more old school university style researchers, you've maybe felt this, they will start straight deep in their thing. And you're sitting there going, I don't know why this is relevant. I don't know why this is interesting. I don't know why I should care. Okay, so start at the middle. Whenever establish why your audience should be interested in this. Where are the connections to their world? Okay, what are the overlaps? And they can be a whole host of different things. There are lots of different things you can connect to. You can connect to ideas they've had, right? Thoughts that they may have come across, ideas they are familiar with, concepts they know. You can connect to global issues. I don't mean that necessarily as global in the world, but like their community, their world, things that interact with their world in various ways, politics that's happening at the minute, that kind of stuff, kind of bigger issues. You can connect to values they hold. Are you working with a community that is particularly family orientated? Are you working with a community that is really hot on climate change, because we had it mentioned earlier, right? And wants to do that. So you can connect your work to their values that they hold, right? Is this a particularly, I don't know, moralistic community you're working with, or they're just after the money, or politicians who just want to save their own skin? And that's a bit damning, but I'm usually quite political, and I just realized that you're all working in public health, and maybe I should just watch out for that. And you can connect to, as we mentioned before, places they're familiar with, places they know about, places they can imagine. Finding these things to connect to the world, to connect to them, is really, really important. So put stuff in that they care about, reference why that your work intersects with those things. The other big one, the huge one here, and for public health, you have a good head start, is put people in. Put people in the work. This can be the participants you're working with. This could be, well, actually, let's do a little game. Write down, tell me in the chat box, who are the people? Who are the people in your work? Who are the audiences? Who are the groups of people that your work intersects with? Tell me in the chat box. Again, public health is all about people, or a lot of it's about people, so should be some good ones. Mothers and children, children and young people, citizens, residents, very wide, like everybody. Local citizens, they were niching down a little, council staff, academia, yeah. Patients, all of us, Heather, yeah, nice and big as well. Heather, I recognize your name. Have we met? I feel like I've met you before somewhere, or I've emailed you or something. Anyway, government departments, local authority staff, people with lived experience, obesity, yeah. Academics and third sectors, goods, Blackpool residents, your team, colleagues, older people, diverse group, healthcare professionals, Alison, yeah. So the kind of clinical side of the work is in there as well, perhaps. Patients referred to positive programs, good. None of you have said it yet. The easiest person to put into talking about your work is yourself. You can talk about yourself. You can talk about your own thoughts and feelings and endeavors and the stuff you want to do. The point about this is the most interesting thing to a human being is another human being, because we are all people, right? If you look at almost all storytelling, it is about people. Even stories that don't appear to be about people are often anthropomorphized. So you get animals like Marvin the mole, who behaves like a person, and we relate to him. Put people in, tell the stories of people, talk about their emotions. What are they thinking? What are they feeling? What are their lives like? Talk about yourself. How did it feel when a particular intervention worked and it was fantastic? How did it feel when you went to work with a community and actually you saw that the problems that you're going to have to solve are actually causing really severe trauma or difficulties or experiences, how did that affect you, and why does that have your drive or help your drive or whatever? The point about this is twofold. One, information is more interesting if it's wrapped around people, because we find people interesting and we empathize and we care with them and we connect with them. And two, you are more interesting as a communicator if you come across as a person. If you come across as human with thoughts and feelings and emotions, and you care about the work and you want to do stuff. This is a technique. You can do it quite subtly. You can also do it quite deep, which I think, Joanna, I'm just looking at your comment there. The people Mike focus on is most affected by cost cutting and crisis and the audience, and I need to convince his council senior leadership to spend their money here. Hard one, right? I imagine getting council to decide where to spend their funds is what quite a lot of some of you do, which is quite a tricky thing to do. And putting people in, this can go really well. It can also go really hard. So the the hardcore end of this is to do tugging on heartstrings stuff. Okay, it's to do, these people are suffering, we need to help them. This is Jamal, he's hasn't got enough food, and so doesn't have breakfast in the morning, and so he's failing his GCSEs, and so he's not going to fulfill his potential. And you play on those stories, right, that cause empathy. Depending on the situation and the audience, that is the right thing to do. It is not always the right thing to do. It can backfire on you, right? If one of the interesting things about what I teach and what I do and the way stories and communication works is some of it is manipulation. I am trying to manipulate you to help me achieve my goals and manipulate your attention so you pay attention to me. People tend to not like being manipulated. So if you do it really obviously and really where they've not kind of signed up for it, then doing the project with you now, Duncan, Heather, that's embarrassing, isn't it, Heather? If you kind of go too hard and like, okay, imagine the scene, here we go, there's going to be this, you can run into stuff. You can also run into overly simplistic narratives. Think all of the stuff around Live Aid back in the 80s and a lot of the kind of old school 80s and 90s charity sector storytelling was about poverty and representations of poverty and what that is, and it was very reductive and two-dimensional and unsubtle, and that can get you in problems as well. So storytelling is something you have to be slightly careful with, particularly when you're trying to cause emotional response in your audience to get them to care about things, but you can do it. And just including people without going too dramatic, without laying it on too thick, can be a good way to just get some of the use of this technique without it feeling tacky or awkward or tokenistic there. So to avoid tokenism, have a look around. Are stories being told that are the same story over and over and over again? Okay. And if it's the same story over and over again, can you actually tell a different one? Is there a different person you could talk about? Is there a different angle? Is there a different way to come at this? Because then at least it is refreshing. You don't feel like you're just doing the same thing as everybody else. It's also the sort of depth that you layer on the emotional manipulation of it, the heartstrings, right? You can do it quite subtly and just let people imagine it themselves, or you can layer it on quite thick. That is up to you and your specific audiences and contexts, but it's worth thinking about how you balance that. What is the right choice here? Yeah. Cool. So talk about people, put people in, give them emotions and names and ways we can connect and resonate with them. We like that. We enjoy that. You've got lots of different groups of people that you've mentioned to me that your work intersect with. You don't always have to do it's the standard story. And I talk about this in kind of healthcare. For example, cancer patients, we always talk about the patient as the hero and the disease is the villain, and we're fighting the down. We always tell this story. And if we want to tug on heartstrings, we can tell the story of the patient who's having a really hard time and it's really difficult in their family and these things. Now, in that space, that story gets told a lot. You might actually be more effective telling the story of the burnt out and frustrated consultant who doesn't have the information or the technology or the resources needed to solve their problems and do their jobs well. That's a less well-known story and therefore might be more effective. Kind of see what I mean? Finding those different angles and often just looking at the people and go, let's tell the story of a different person and the work and see how that feels. What does that get us? Where does that go? Can be a good way to find a different route in and a different angle. Okay. Last chunk of 3. Curiosity, making them interested. Human beings are suckers for curiosity. We love it. Okay. A lot of you said at the start, the reason this story structure works is because I want to know what happens next. One of the primary driving forces in most storytelling, whether it is storytelling, whether it's reading a book, whether it's watching a film or listening to an audiobook or whatever, is what is going to happen next in some sort of variety or variation on that theme. Where is this going to go? So thinking about the order you give out your information in your communications. So what do we start with? And we're going to do structure in a moment, but how you arrange that can be really good, but also what are things you can do in the moment or talk about that engender a sense of curiosity. We're going to do silly, upfront, dramatic stuff and then subtler stuff. So first up, hooks. Hooks are fabulous. Hooks are about catching attention, but usually that has some sort of curiosity generation behind it as well. And there are several different ones. First one, which I really like, that works very well. Have you ever seen a pink hippopotamus? No? Okay. Who is now imagining a pink hippopotamus? Some of you have got that in your heads, which ties us back to this idea of imagery and storytelling, but fundamentally asking a question. Asking questions gets your audience to think about the answer. So it's a really useful technique for making them think about the thing you want them to think about. So we've come into a session, or maybe you are on the back of you're doing your piece on the back of a bit of a lively debate, and people are maybe still thinking about the previous bit of content or the previous ideas they've been thinking about. You need to get everybody's minds lined up with your subject. Let's think about this. Opening with a question is a really nice way to do that. And it can be a subtle question. It can be a big question. I worked with the dementia group here in Newcastle, and they sometimes open their public communication talks with who in this room has been affected by dementia in some way. And it's usually a lot of people, and they then use that answer to make a point about this being a more common thing than is often talked about and why their work is important. They kind of lead into that. So it can be that kind of thing. It can be silly things, surprising things. It can be subtle things. If you're doing more learning, teaching, training, facilitation type work, starting with something that is, what would you like to get out of this? Or even community consultancy type work, or working with communities to get their input and their feedback on things. Starting with, why are you here? What are you hoping the session will achieve for you? Is a real hack for getting them to start thinking about what they want out of a session. And there's an interesting bit of psychology. They're more likely to get the stuff out that they want out if they're already thinking about it. So you can kind of force that on them, which is very useful. So opening with a question or having questions seeded throughout. This is also, this idea of hooks is what gets called clickbait online. When we see it, the headline, you'll never guess what this granny found down the back of the sofa. And you go, I bet I will. And you click the thing and it's just adverts and you go, damn it. The interesting thing about clickbait is we know we're being manipulated when people do it, but if that attention is rewarded, if it's not just adverts, if it's legitimately quite a funny story about a granny finding something down the back of the sofa, you don't mind. You're like, hey, okay, fair dues, you brought me in for a good reason. So using this sort of dramatic opening can feel a bit tacky, but so long as you back it up with interesting or useful stuff for your audience, they don't mind. The next bit of this is what I call TED Talk openings. Are we familiar with TED Talks? It used to be quite good, now a bit weird and fascist and right-wing. Probably always were, but they've come out of hiding a bit. However, they all start like this. I'm going to tell you how you can change the world. Every single TED Talk starts like that. We don't believe them, right? Because we've seen TED Talks before and we're like, yeah, I'm not sure about that. But a little bit of your brain goes, I don't believe you, but let's just see where you're going. Let's see where we're going with this. What's happening here, right? And that's the curiosity. That's the hook. Fundamentally, rather than asking a question, this is about making a bold or surprising or interesting statement, something that causes a sort of unexpectedness. So I worked with a guy who studied how businesses do accounting, and he came to me and he said, I find it interesting. Everybody else thinks it's the most boring thing in the world. And we ended up opening his talk with, hello, everybody, welcome. This is going to be the best talk about spreadsheets you have ever heard. Right? And everyone's going, no, I don't believe you, but all right. Well, it's a big promise. Let's see where we go. Again, it is better if you follow up on the promise than if you do a kind of thing. It's the charisma. Some of this stuff is in delivery as well. I teach presentation skills. We're doing storytelling today. We have whole other workshops to talk about delivery. But yeah, so some of it is delivery and pulling these techniques off, which is worth saying, actually. Storytelling is powerful. It's really, really useful. It can do a lot of things, as I hope I've convinced you, but it's not always the right tool for every situation. And lots of people who espouse storytelling and say it's a wonderful thing for communication forget that part. It's not always the right thing. If you go into a financial director's board meeting and you go, right, imagine the scene, they're going to be like, shut up, just tell us the numbers. That's not what we're here for. It's not what we want. So there's an element of choosing your tools. An awful lot of presentation skills is about knowing the techniques and then deciding when to use them most effectively. So thank you for whoever made that point that I picked up on. That was useful. The other bit of curiosity, which we have touched on, somebody touched on earlier, is information gaps. Deliberately creating information gaps causes people to be curious. Now, there is a balance. You don't want gaps so big that people feel uninformed, particularly in things like public health. That's not a great vibe. But if there are slight information gaps, we really want to know more. This is why once upon a time, and you go, okay, great, where is this going? Because you know there's going to be a story and you want to know what happens. The easiest way to think about information gaps in terms of research work is talk about the problems. Talk about issues you've had. Talk about the struggles. Talk about things that aren't going well, because then people want to know how you solved them or how you're going to solve them. There can be a great temptation, particularly when we're reporting on projects, to just kind of do quite like a flat line. We did this, we did this, we did this, we did this, and we solved the problem. We did this and it was all great. And that's A, untrue. No project ever works like that. And B, it's really boring to listen to, right? Because it's just done. Whereas we set out to do the project, and the first thing that happened was we discovered we couldn't do this, right? We had this issue that we had to solve and it was really difficult, but we brought in some external expertise and they helped us solve the problem. Or we came up with a really creative solution, or we went back to the community we're working with and we got their input and they let us down on the right angle. You can use how you solve problems to show off as well. This is really good for job interviews, this one, for showing off your skill set or your team skill set or why you're valuable doing the work you're doing. But that also makes it more interesting. So, little activity in the chat box. Tell me, friends, complete the sentence. Researcher versus. What gets in the way? What causes problems? You can insert public health professional rather than researcher if you would rather. Bear. Researcher versus bears. Unless bear is an acronym for something. Researcher funding. Mona, absolutely. Yep. Funding. Research funding gets in the way. Lack of. Researcher versus politics. Nice, Teresa. Researcher versus practitioner. Stats. The data just doesn't work. Commissioners. Time. There we go. Because see, that's the other big one. Funding and time usually come up quite a lot. Language. Really interesting. Could be some subtle stuff in there, Sharon. Capacity, impact, tiredness. Researcher versus participants. Nice, Mona. Again, that's a slightly different angle, right? We very rarely do we necessarily moan about our participants. I'm watching Educating Yorkshire at the moment, and they've got a tagline in the intro that says, "This working in a school would be so much better if there weren't any students. Working in public health would be great if there was no public." Same kind of idea. Versus academia versus AI and modern technology. Yep. Self-doubt, Joe. Great. So that's bringing maybe some personal stuff in. Versus competing client interests, perhaps. Okay. One of the things I really like about this little exercise, and it's just a quick exercise, but if you write down all the things your verse is, this can give you quite an interesting framework. So Joe, if you went and did a talk about what it's like working in public health, and actually you framed it around your challenges with self-doubt, that's quite a different feeling talk, probably, from the stuff people are used to hearing, and therefore quite interesting, right? And it allows you to bring some of yourself in, which we talked about before. Similarly, so let's go for a different one. Laura talking about the volume of data. Somebody else mentioned stats, right? Actually talking about that problem rather than talking about, you know, the public health problem that we're trying to solve in the end. Niching down and be like, you know what, I'm going to take my 10 minutes or my 20 minutes, and I'm going to talk about data and how we really struggle dealing with the data, and hopefully how we solve that in the end, or what we're working to do to solve that in the end. It's a really good way of finding slightly different feeling talks or different framings for the stuff that also allow you to talk about the work in different ways. Really good. Anya has to leave. Don't worry, Anya, it will be recorded so you can catch up. Okay, last 10 minutes. You're doing well, team. We've been going for an hour. Shake it out, have a deep breath if you need to. If you're getting tired, we're going to go for another 10 minutes and then you can ask me things. Okay, structure. If you have dipped your toe into storytelling, you will have come across this word or this concept before. There are loads of different ways to structure stories and structure information, but fundamentally, all structure is the order in which the audience experiences the information. Right? The order in which the audience experiences the information. And you, as the person giving out that information or writing the talk or putting together a poster campaign or whatever it is you're doing, you get to decide that order. Posters are slightly different because people can start looking at it any way you like. However, you can design the visuals to direct a particular path through the poster if you want to. So what is the order? Now, we'll start with the classic. What is the classic 3 parts to traditional storytelling? So traditional stories like Pixar films or Disney films or Lord of the Rings. What is the traditional 3-part structure? Somebody has mentioned it already. Bam, bam, bam. Start, middle, end. It is indeed, both of you, straight out there. Prizes for you. Beginning, middle, and end. This is an old idea, apparently. Aristotle came up with this, ancient Greek guy with a big beard, because he felt that rhetoric and debate should follow life, and life has a beginning bit and a middle bit and an end bit, and that's fine as far as it goes. Rhiannon is a bit more into storytelling and is going with hero, downfall, rise, which is the classic rise and fall structure for storytelling. Hook, action, conclusion is another way of framing it that's more storytelling orientated. Filmmakers use that quite a lot, hook, action, conclusion. Objective, hindrance, and overcome. Okay, that's a problem solution loop, which we'll talk about in a sec. Beginning, middle, end. The problem with it is that over time, this has got warped and twisted, particularly in academia and public organizational settings, but also in corporate land. And it gets warped into something terrible. And there's 2 versions of the terrible. One is introduction, content, summary, which is very bland and kind of nothing. It can be done well, but it doesn't really lead you anywhere. The other one, which is worse, which I see a lot in academia, is tell them what you can tell them it, and tell them what you told them. Anybody come across that one before or been told that that's how you should do stuff and structure information? Don't stop it unless you're in a very specific situation where you are giving orders to people, because that's where it comes from. Tell them what you're going to tell them came out of it's a communication doctrine from the United States Army in the Second World War, or after the Second World War, about giving clear orders to soldiers, right? It's about really hammering home, you need to go here and do this or we're all going to die, which is not the situation most of us find ourselves in. A better structure is the one I'm going to give you now. It's also 3 parts, but it maps easier onto work, research work, and projects in various different ways. We start with the problem. What is the problem we're working on and trying to solve? Now, this can be very broad. This can be the big public health challenge. We don't have enough clean air in our cities and people are getting ill. There are funding cuts to school meals and children are going hungry and not concentrating. It can be the big problem. Or it can be looking at that researcher versus, it can be a reframing. It can be me versus my self-doubt. Or this is the day that I bashed my head against the council data servers and worked out how they worked, right? It can be a more niche problem if you're talking to a more niche audience. So the general rule of thumb, if you're talking to a very broad audience with quite a broad array of things they care about, remember that Venn diagram, you want quite a broad problem. Usually zooming out, climate change bad, people dying in poverty bad, that level of thing. If you're talking to a more niche and specific audience, you can niche down into a more specific problem that they resonate with. We are running out of money. If you do this, you're more likely to get elected again. Right? That sort of thing. So there's a bit of zooming in and out you can do with problem. The key here, the key with problem, is make them care about the problem. So you either tie it to a problem they already care about, or you have to do some work whereby maybe through telling some stories about people involved with the problem or showing them the people in the situation, you make them empathize with and care about the problem. And the point is, at the end of this, they're going, that feels like a pretty damn good problem. We should do something about it. And you go, I'm glad you say that. And I'm glad you asked, because we are doing something. This is part 2 of the structure. This is the strategy. What are we doing? What have we done? What are we going to do, depending on your context, to try and solve this problem? What is it we're doing? What are the interventions we're making? What is the plan? Okay, what is the strategy? This is, those of you who've got an academic background, this is not quite the same as methodology, right? Methodology is, and we used so-and-so's thing from the 1982 paper, yawn, nobody cares. This is more like the simple, we're going to go and do this, and then we're going to go and do this, and we're going to go talk to the community and then gather a bunch of data, and then we're going to open some community centers, or we're going to put doctors' clinics in libraries for 2 days a week, or whatever it is you're doing. I'm making vast assumptions about public health work here, so if the examples feel slightly reductive, I apologize, but I don't know your world terribly well. Then at the end of that, they go, okay, sounds like a good plan. Sounds like a thing that, yeah, let's go. Tell me, is it going to work? Or did it work? Right? Have we solved the problem? And crucially, this outcome is connected back to the problem. So you reference back to the original problem. What has doing this stuff done to this world? So there's a world here where there's a problem. We've done a bunch of stuff, or we're going to do a bunch of stuff. What does the world look like now? Okay, what is the outcome? Did we solve the problem? Did we not solve the problem? Did we realize it's the wrong problem? We need more time and money, or we need to go and solve a different problem first, and then we'll come back and deal with this one later. What have we learnt by doing this work? Or if you haven't done the project yet, what are we hoping the outcome will be? What are we hoping to have learned? What are we hoping to have got out of it? This structure is the simplest of the structures we teach. It is really useful in a whole host of settings and situations. You can write a presentation that looks like this. You can write a report that looks like this. You can, those of you on the academic side, you can write impact case studies that look like this. You can write a networking blurb, like a 60-second elevator pitch. You know, when you go networking and people go, hey, so what do you do? And you have to go blah, 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 blah. And if you have a good one, they stay and chat. And if you have a bad one, they go, I need to go to the loo, and disappear. You can do that with this, right? It's really useful in lots of different things. You could set up a poster, right, with 3 chunks that has problem, strategy, outcome. You could set up an advert, a series of adverts. There's lots of things you can do with it. So have this, take this away, stick it in your back pocket. Instead of thinking introduction, content, summary, or beginning, middle, end, or tell them what you're going to tell them, think this. And the reason it works is it's curiosity driven all the way through. So here is a problem. You've made me care about this, but it's a problem, so I want to know how we're going to solve the problem. You tell me how we're going to solve the problem, but you don't tell me if it worked yet. So did it work? I'm still curious. And then you tell me, so there's a drive for your audience to pay attention all the way through. There's a reason for it all the way through. And that's why it works. So take that one, stick it in your back pocket. Come and talk to me more if you want to learn more structures. So we've got these different areas of tool sets, these pathways that we can find into the kind of conversation. So going back to this idea of ways in, right? Using imagery to help your audience picture and imagine the stuff that's happening, putting the people in, telling the people stories, the emotional stories, putting your own self in and your own emotions to make yourself more captivating, but also to make the work matter in people's minds. And then using curiosity in various different ways to make them want to know what's going to happen next, or where we're going, or how do we solve the problem. Okay, these are all about getting people to access the information, and getting them to catch the ball. So I want to play catch, and I feel like I can, because I can see what the thing is. I get it. They're really useful and powerful techniques, and you can use them kind of just in individuality, like we've talked about. You can have a metaphor here, you could talk about people there, you could frame a thing around a problem there, or you can put it all together. And if you put it all together, what you get is a person in a place with a problem. And that is a really interesting story, because we care about the person, we want to know how they solve the problem, and we can imagine the place they're in and the setting it's happened. If you think about most sort of fiction, it tends to revolve around a person in a place with a problem, or repetitions of that, which I call problem solution loops. So our hero has a problem, they solve it, then they go away and they have another problem and they solve it, and they go and have another problem and they solve it. And that's all part of solving a bigger problem, right? So last couple of minutes before we go to Q&A, what I'd like you to do is have a think. You can write it in the chat box if you want to, but you don't have to. But have a mull. Find a person. It could be you. It could be one of the other people connected to your work in some way. Think about the problem they have, and think about where that happens. And the final point here, the final P rather, is point. So if you can get all of that, what could you achieve by talking about this person in this place with the problem? What point could you make? What thing could you illustrate? What argument could you construct? So have a couple of minutes, think about that. You can drop it in the chat if you want to, but just have a little mull. No worries, Kate, take off. Thanks very much. Sharon's one. Coffee is important to studying. Well, you've done very well, Sharon, for staying awake and staying with us, and switched on enough to know what the final activity is without coffee this morning. But we've also got one from Teresa, a deaf person in a noisy environment and can't access communication. I empathize. If you built that up a little bit, I'd want to know how they solved that problem. What can we do to help? All of those sorts of things start coming in there. A housebound older person stuck at home and don't know what their tablets are for. Yeah, tough, really tough. Oh, Sharon, yeah, please do email me. Cool. So some of you are writing stuff in. You can keep doing that if you want. The thing I think that's really, once you've got this, so I call these, like, it's almost the seed of a story, a person in the place with the problem. You have a story that will be interesting. To make it useful, though, you need to have that extra thing. You need to have a point. What is the purpose of telling this story? I went to play catch in the park. We had a person playing catch in the park. They had a problem. They got distracted by the ice cream van. This meant that they got hit in the face with a ball. Okay. But the point was to make a metaphor about the work that I do and how you can think about communication. So these stories and storytelling is only really useful if you have a point. You've maybe seen speakers before who go off on tangents and you're not sure where this is going. That's really annoying. Audiences will put up with it for a couple of minutes before they're like, I want to know the relevance of this, right? Where are we going with it? So making sure that when you're using these ideas and these techniques, particularly if you're going deep into, let me tell you a story about this person who's got an issue, that you have a point with it. You know what where you want the conversation to go afterwards. What the thing you're trying to say is, you're trying to communicate is. One of my research petitions being stuck in a house during the pandemic with a broken curtain rail and neighbours looking in, but no men are allowed to do the DIY. She solved it through YouTube and trial and error, and realizing her work does not have to be perfect to be usable. And that's a lovely story, Sherilyn, to feel there. That's really nice. A neurodivergent person in an open plan office environment requiring open plan working. Cool. So one of the things that's interesting here is that you don't have to have the solution to the problem for the person to make it an interesting story. It doesn't always have to have a happy ending. It doesn't always have to finish well. And there are lots of other techniques. Somebody mentioned further up in the chat, what about the twist? Twist is another technique you put in here to subvert the audience's expectations. It's another curiosity generation technique, essentially, because you keep the audience guessing about where this is going to go, because it's not formulaic, so I'm not sure. But there are lots of other techniques you can play with if you get into storytelling in a big way. But these ideas, I think, are really useful for most people in the research space. Just to think, the reason you can use these tools is to give people access to the content. Make it feel like there are ways in, they can understand it, they can visualize it, they can empathize with the things going on. In public health, you have a good starting place because it involves all of us. But hopefully I've given you some ideas that will resonate in other places as well. That's the end of my bit of chat. Thank you very much. And we've got about 12 minutes or so for questions, which is fabulous. If you've got to dash off, please do dash off. You can get there'll be, so we don't send the slides around because, as you've seen, they're not very useful without me there. But we will send a key points document around with the kind of key ideas we've covered and talked about that you can reference back to. And this recording will be available on the site and the hub thing for the project. You can also get in touch with me if you want more of this training, or your group needs, or university or whatever could do with some communications and presentation skills training. We travel all over the country, even to the seaside, doing various bits and pieces. So if you would like to talk about that, please do get in touch. I'll do questions in a second. If you want to get in touch with me, I'm Duncan on the bottom. Matt is my colleague. I'm on LinkedIn and on Blue Sky. There's a QR code there, which has a newsletter with a whole bunch of tips in it. You'll also get my email address if you sign up to that, but you can get my email address from Nicola as well if you want to talk to me about anything. So if you've got to dash off, please dash off now. That's absolutely fine. You've got the important stuff. Otherwise, I'm going to hang around for 10 minutes or so answering questions. So let's see. Has anybody got questions? Thank you all very much for stuff. I believe there's going to be some evaluation and stuff going around as well, so tell Nicola what you thought of this and whether it was good and whether she should pay me more money and get me back to do more, but also what sorts of content will be useful and that kind of thing. So questions, let's have a look. They have shot up the chat a little bit. Lots of people saying thank you, which is lovely. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Does my advice differ for short form storytelling? Not really. Fionala, I think. The advice is the same. The amount of time you have to do stuff is shorter. So you have to be more specific about, let's pick one technique maybe, right? If I've got a 3-minute thing that I'm doing, let's maybe just do one nice metaphor and make it really work and make it have a point and leave it there. So time is more of a constraint rather than a changer of techniques. It limits what you can do, but it doesn't necessarily change what works well. However, things like hooks, right? The questions that get you to your subject really fast and quite impactfully are maybe useful because you don't have time to do a waffly introduction. You shouldn't be doing a waffly introduction anyway, but you know. So that's a good question. Hopefully that answer makes sense. What else have we got? Lots of new thoughts. Brilliant, really engaging. Thank you, guys. First proposal. Yeah, this stuff applies to written documentation as well. I'm a presentation specialist, but this applies to writing and proposals and reports and all this kind of stuff as well in various different ways. So if you're doing that work, do that. We have a question from Nora. Hello. What is your opinion on AI? I get the impression that it's used quite frequently. I'm not sure how useful it is for developing storytelling skills and similar abilities. I get the feeling that it usually lacks depth. AI, you can't get around it. So my personal take is we don't use it very much. I'm dyslexic, so I do use it for essentially fancy copy editing. Because if I have to go through and manually take out all the typos, it'll take me forever. But the thing about creativity in AI is fundamentally how they work, or at least the large language models that most people mean when they say AI, is they are averaging machines. They are literally pulling up the most likely next word to be a thing. They feel like they know stuff and they're talking, but they aren't. They are making probability choices. They're probability machines. And what that means is they are going to always default to average. The most common answer to this question or this set of words is this set of words, which means they're kind of rubbish at creativity because they're always going to be zeroing into average. They can be used in various different ways for presenting. I know there are AI agents out there that will make slides for you and write scripts for you and this kind of thing. They can be really useful for giving you like I need to explain this concept to a group of 10-year-olds. Give me a starting point. So I would say use them for idea generation, maybe if you want to, but not necessarily final output. Because the stuff they produce is not going to have a human soul, for want of a better term. And I think that's quite important. A lot of what we teach is about connection, and humans connect to humans, and we don't like it when we don't. There was a really interesting study recently somebody pulled up, which was, I can't remember where it was, so don't ask me, but if organizations use AI and then tell the people they're talking to that they've used AI, their trust drops massively. So people don't trust organizations and use it, and that's because we like talking to humans, even if actually AI is actually producing better results. And you run into things like driverless cars use AI to drive safer than humans. That's probably good because it can do the calculations faster than me. But in communication, we tend to not trust it if we know all the answers have come from AI, which is quite interesting. But it can be quite useful for idea generation if you're stuck on something, or how do I approach this issue, or give me 5 different ways of talking about this public health issue with this thing. If you're using the publicly available AIs, be careful about what information you put in there, because all of the data is owned by the American corporations who run them. Yeah, don't ever put anything in any way confidential in there. Yeah, so it's a big conversation, but a good one to bring up. What else have we got? Lots of questions. Bum, 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 bum. How do I defend not using LLMs? It's very easy to defend not using them. They're ethically awful. They use huge amounts of energy and resource and water. They are biased in very many deep ways. There are no safeguards about them. There's lots of stuff. The data you put into them is not protected. There's interesting studies about students and kids using them, and it changes the way you think, and it becomes, if you rely on it a lot for original thought, your ability to create original thought decreases, and that kind of stuff. So that's how I defend it. Not using it deeply. What else have we got? Any other questions? Have I missed anything, Nicola, that you spotted? Does anybody want to come on microphone and ask me a question? Somebody says I should be paid more. Take note. I'm already being paying quite a lot. It's all good. Don't worry about it. Question from Diane. Hello, Diane.
Hi, Duncan. I did put in if you had any kind of book recommendations around this kind of thing. I know in autoethnography they talk quite a lot about Stephen King's book on how to write and things like that. I was just wondering if you had any takes.
What are you looking for? Anything, any area presenting specifically?
Just about, I've turned into quite a stuffy writer, having been a civil servant for so many years, and this notion of kind of using a slightly more, as I think word-wise we do, and when we present we do, but when we write, I tend to default into this robot probably sounds more like AI than AI sounds like. So, and I'm exploring autoethnography at the moment for a potential research project, and
Yeah.
a lot of it is look at the way that actual writers write and those kind of things. So I was just wondering if there was any that you've picked up on that you thought, gosh, that's somewhere in between.
Not from a writing perspective, as the combination of my subject area and the dyslexia mean that writing has never been my happy place. But I would suggest, looking at fiction writers, how they do what they do, even go on a pure fiction writing course and just see what you can pull. One of the things that I find really interesting about this stuff is when you look at, instead of going, oh, where is the creative writing for civil servants book? Go straight and do a creative writing course and steal the stuff that works in your contexts. In a presentation sense, and the way we think about engagement, and this book, Hook, by Dr. Paul McCrory, is a really interesting one. It's written from the perspective of informal science education. So he does science communication with kids and schools and that kind of stuff. And it's all about hooks and how you hold audiences and how you manipulate them and how you play with curiosity and how you do this sort of stuff in quite a deep way. And if you can see past his specific context and setting, I think there's gold in that for anybody who communicates anywhere. Other stuff that made me more creative and interesting in what I do. What have we got? Sorry, 3 books. Data Story by Nancy Duarte is particularly interesting for those of you who work a lot with data. She's got some interesting ideas about stuff. She's quite dogmatic about her one structure that she uses, but she's got some quite good stuff in there. Made to Stick, some of you might have come across this one, is from a psychology perspective. How do you make ideas memorable? How do you make stuff stick in people's heads? And then from a completely different angle, this is Be More Pirate, which is about entrepreneurship, actually. It's about how entrepreneurs are like the old school pirates. It's how to be disruptive in a sector, and how to bring new ideas to fruition and be bold and that kind of stuff. And it is focused on entrepreneurship and business building, but there's some interesting, if you're sitting there going, I want more bravery, I want more boldness, I want to try things a little bit more, there's some interesting stuff in there, I think, for that. So
that's great, thank you.
Some of those might help you. Cool. Susan Jennings, hello.
Hello, thank you, that was brilliant. So I just wanted to ask, would you make any adaptations if you're presenting to people that you work closely with a lot? Because it's quite a different situation to presenting to people that you're more remote from.
Yes. So a lot of the changes would be in formality of tone, probably, and formality of delivery to some extent. But also you are much more familiar with the knowledge you can assume. The team you're working with, you know what they know. So you can reference stuff in a much more fast and loose kind of way rather than being quite so constructed about things. However, even having like a team meeting and going through problem, strategy, outcomes, like even if you're like reporting back to the team on the project, that kind of thing can still be useful because it's a logical flow that people can follow. I guess with teams that know each other well and audiences that you're really comfortable with, is essentially just a relaxing of the technique. Stuff comes a bit more fluffy. But the way we think about presenting is anywhere when you are talking to more than one other person, and you have a goal, so a thing you're trying to achieve. And if you're in that situation, so that can be a team meeting or a mentoring chat, or there's loads of different situations, thinking about that goal ahead of time, even if it's just your team, like it feels obvious to do it with an external presentation or whatever, but internally you just be like, oh, we're just turning up for the team meeting, and then 2 hours have passed and you haven't really chatted about anything useful. Thinking about what you want to achieve out of it beforehand and trying to construct your own arguments or questions or the things you bring up in a way that helps you get that answer, that purpose, that feedback, whatever it is you're trying to do, being more deliberate. So I think actually I wouldn't change anything. I would probably say bring more of the deliberateness that you would bring to external situations into more comfortable ones can help counteract the fluffiness of informal situations that don't actually spend their time wisely. Is that a useful
Brilliant.
thought?
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. Thank
Cool,
you.
good. No worries at all. We can do one more question if it's a quick one, although we've hit past and Nicola's appeared on my screen, so I think I'm being told to shut up and go away. Let's not do another question then. I'll shut up and go away. But thank you all. It's been so good. Nicola, have you got anything you want to say just at the end?
Huge thanks, Duncan. The comments in the chat and the round of applause that's popped up and things like that. Really enjoyed it. Really engaging. I think we've all learned an awful lot from what you've covered, and great that you've got that top tips document that you're going to send out as a follow-up in place of slides. And I think you've already referenced this, but having your email address and contact details on there so people can follow up as well. And can't wait to get you back. I think there's a groundswell of opinion around that. So just a huge thanks from everybody. Thank you from the Specialist Centre. Cool. Yeah, and I'm sure that we'll be advertising another one of your webinars and other things very soon.
Yeah, no, complete pleasure. It's been really fun. And if I can help folk with stuff, get in touch. It's worth noting that I do work one-to-one as well. So if you find presenting really difficult, or you've got a particularly big talk or something that you struggle with, we can help there, as well as in kind of group training type work. But no, I'd love to come back, and there's so much to cover. It's such a big subject. But thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Take care.